Durban and of San Francisco Bay Area, like I already said, two great port cities. What's the main reason? It's not just that they're two great harbor cities in two different hemispheres in two different parts of the world. It's because workers, dock workers in these important port cities are the most militant members of the working classes in these two cities and have been for 150 years, right? And so what we witness today, for better and worse, is actually examples of that, right? When a dozen or more members of the ILWU Local 10 showed up here and disrupted things a little, right? Well, that's what working class militants do, right? And so, for better and worse, we saw a little of that today, right? Why are we here? We're here because we're celebrating one of the most important events in South African history, the Durban strikes. What is a strike? It's the most powerful weapon that workers have, right? It's been the most powerful weapon that workers have had since the birth of capitalism, right? And it's also connected, of course, to the maritime world, right? Shipping really sort of made capitalism, shipping made imperialism possible, right? And the very most powerful weapon that workers have, past and present, in English is the strike, right? And as we know, in the 1700s in London, England, the most important port city in the world then, when workers wanted a raise, who were sailors, and they sailed up the Thames, they took down the sails of their ship, and the nautical term for that is to strike the sail. And that's why we have the word strike in the English language, right? That tells us the centrality of not just the tools that workers have, but that sailors and dock workers are actually at the center of global capitalism, past and present, right? And so in those basic ways, that's why I sort of chose to sort of focus on these subjects. It just so happened that I had written a book on dock workers previously. It just so happened that I was already interested in the intersections between race and class in multiracial societies. It just so happened that I believed, as probably most of us, that workers, in fact, are the key to sort of transformation of our society and world, right? And so for me, these were the basic reasons why, right? Of course, I am from the United States, and I was not trained as a South Africanist, and I was incredibly appreciative of the many generous people, some of whom are in this room, who welcomed me from the Northern Hemisphere and treated me as an ally and a comrade, and helped me in various ways. And some of you are named in my book, some of you are not, but like the generosity I've experienced from the South African workers, South African labor movement, South African academics has been tremendous, right? Like, and I am incredibly appreciative of that, right? Because it would be easy to sort of look at me as just another person coming down from the north who wants to sort of take something, right? Currently, this book is published just in the United States, although I'm very hopeful that the University of KwaZulu-Natal Press will be publishing it in the near future, so that it is more accessible here in South Africa. You know, the subjects of my book is a comparative history. It studies how workers who have power can use their power, right? The title of the book is simple, but I'll just read one quote from one of the original leaders of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, Lou Goldblatt, who said, "The shipping industry has a feature that should never be underestimated. The economic power of longshoremen is fantastic compared to most workers, the amount of economic leverage they have." Now that's no secret. That's why employers hate unions, and that's why employers hate workers sort of organizing generally. But as I've told my students more than once, if I don't come to class, the world economy doesn't stop. But if dockers actually don't do their jobs, literally the world economy stops. That's why when a dumb ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal, it's global news for a week, right? It literally interrupted the world economy, even if it was unintentional in that case, right? So my book basically looks at sort of three main themes. One is when workers are powerful, how they use their power, not just to benefit themselves, although as a member of a union, I'm very happy that I have a contract that maybe pays me more than if I was not in a union, right, in the same industry, right? But how they can use their power on behalf of others, in particular racial equality in societies that were built on racism and white supremacy, the United States and South Africa, right? And how dockers, both in the Bay Area and in Durban, use their power in various ways, yes, to improve their own economic conditions, who wouldn't, but also frequently on behalf of others, right? People who you don't necessarily even know, but you feel solidarity with, right, in your own society. So one of the themes of my book is how dockers in Durban were pivotal to the Durban strikes, but also more broadly to the struggle against apartheid, as well as how in the United States, dockers in the Bay Area and other parts of the US West Coast were pivotal to the American civil rights movement, locally and nationally. Right? And a second theme of the book deals with how workers also can use their power, similar, on behalf of people they've never even met in other countries. Right? And how if workers refuse to unload cargo, as we heard today, right, in 1962 actually was the first time that San Francisco dock workers refused to unload a Dutch ship full of South African cargo. We of course know in this room that it's not coincidence that it was a Dutch cargo ship company that was actually moving South African cargo. Right? But in 62, in the mid-70s, and in 84, as we heard today, for 11 days, these workers refused to sort of unload South African cargo. Organized by themselves, for years of education by themselves. And although Jack Heyman spoke today a little about the October 1984 when the resolution was passed, so that the ship in November of 84 that came in wasn't unloaded, what he didn't mention was that actually at that October 1984 monthly meeting, they showed the documentary Last Grave at Dimbaza, right? A film that was used around the world in the struggle against apartheid to educate people outside of South Africa about what the situation is. And so if you watch that film or rewatch it after the hour, you're pissed, right? What can I do, right? That was planned. Let's call a motion to not work a ship. It was a unanimous vote that night, right? And it wasn't random, right? And it also wasn't the first time that the Southern Africa Liberation Support Committee, which was the name of the rank and file committee in Local 10, chose to sort of act on solidarity, not just with people in South Africa, they also provided support for people in Zimbabwe and in Mozambique, and in Namibia too, Southern Africa Liberation Support, because they understood that the southern cone of Africa was the last place. Now, we also saw today a little that the majority of Local 10 members, that's the Bay Area branch, are African American. It's the only local in actually the LWU that is majority black. Why is that? It's because there was a bunch of left-wing white radicals who formed the union, who then, as more and more African Americans moved into the Bay Area, opened the union up when most unions and most employers wouldn't have done so, right? And so the union that was begun 99% white in the 30s, by the late 60s has an African-American president and a majority black local, right? And they remain to this day the most militant local in that union, and some might say the most important radical union in the United States of America, right? And that's deeply impressive to me. And they don't stop, right? And so what were they doing in Joburg before they came to Durban? Well, they were meeting with some people from NUMSA to try to get their support because they wanted to pull an action next month in solidarity with Muma Ubu Jamal, right? Who they actually shut down the entire West Coast for in 1999, where 25 ports up and down the West Coast didn't work for a day to protest what some people would call a cop killer, right? But others would call a political prisoner, right? And so the Durban dockers also have engaged in those actions, right? Most famously in 2008, when they refused to unload weapons from China, intended for Zimbabwe. Right? And so that there's a long history of this sort of activism, but it's not history, it's actually the present, right? Because dockers continue to engage in similar actions occasionally in solidarity with struggles, including with the people of Palestine and other places. And so I appreciate the opportunity, especially to speak among so many people who I deeply respect. And I'll be talking a little more about that on Saturday. But thanks again, and thank you for having me.